So on the screen are going to go up a number of movie names. And quickly, that's Skyfall, The Dark Knight, Mission Impossible, Die Hard with a Vengeance, and Speed. I know they're all old movies, but these are classics, and classics are never forgotten. Right? And so if you are a movie buff, you would know that there's a common theme, there's a common thread that runs through all of these movies. There's a common thread that runs through all these movies. Does anyone want to take a guess? As I said, there is a prize. It's a nice prize. You'll get it next Sunday. Does it? Violence. Hi. Oh God, you a PG-rated, man. Triumph. Okay. That's a good one. That's a good stab at it. Government. It's like you in the White House, man. Hero. There's a hero. Okay. That's another good one. I'm looking for something. I thought some of you movie guys would get it. Revenge. Yes, that's true. Redemption, that's true, but that's not what I'm looking for. Two more, and then I'll just give it to you. I'll keep the prize. Somebody said what? Okay. In all these movies, as we watch the movie, we're rooting for the hero, right? We're rooting for the good guy to defeat the bad guy, and then the movie comes to a semi-climax because the bad guy is finally captured. He's eliminated, and we're like, yay! Our hero won. But in all those movies, the common theme or the common thread is that though the villain is caught, their plan or the bombs they had planted are still ticking away. You have captured the thief, the villain, you've killed him, but somehow the mastermind's plan is still in the works. In our series that we've called The Bold and the Beautiful, Haman, who had a plan to kill the Jews, is caught. Caught, not for trying to kill the Jews, but for touching the queen, and he is killed. However, the master plan that he had to kill the Jews was still ongoing. The clock was still ticking, and this is where we pick up our story this morning. It's like when the bad guy from beyond the grave goes, ha 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 ha, I still win. And we would know that if we read Esther 1 and 19, we're told the following. If it meets the king's approval, he should personally issue a royal decree. Let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes so that it cannot be revoked. Daniel also tells us about how when the Persians and the Medes had made laws, no one could revoke them. So even though Haman was dead, the law that the king had set into place was going to be carried out. So what would happen? You've won, but you've actually lost. And so the final act of Esther is the last 3 chapters where we get to see that though the scales be tipped against them, God's grace, God's favor still shines through. But as God's grace and God's favor shines through, there is work that these people still need to do. You see, some of us think that if God's favor is there, if God's grace is there, all I got to do is just sit pretty. No. You are also called to do something. Because, ladies and gentlemen, what we need to understand is that sometimes, though the war has been won, the battle still remains. Though the war has been won, the battle still remains. So as we look at this last act of the book of Esther, I want us to learn a number of things, and I've given them under these headings. Number 1, purpose, partnership, promotion, presence, and if there's time, we'll do a bonus number 5. Here's the first lesson that we get from these last 3 chapters. Purpose. In other words, I'm talking about keep your eyes on the prize. Keep your eyes on the prize. Top of chapter number 8, verse 1. That same day, King Ahasuerus awarded Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Mordecai entered the king's presence because Esther had revealed her relationship to Mordecai. The king removed his signet ring he had recovered from Haman and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther put him in charge of Haman's estate. So at the top of this chapter, we see that both Mordecai and Esther are rewarded. They are given Haman's great wealth. And later on, we'll read that Mordecai was made second in charge under Ahasuerus in Persia. And as you read the text, you would think, wow, the heroes have won. They can sit back and relax and enjoy this victory that they have achieved. But it still remained that Jews were going to be attacked. Now, most of us would think that, well, the king knows me, I've been promoted, so let me just sit and enjoy the wealth that we found. Besides, the king knows us, so no one will attack us. Our progress has removed us from everything else that we were facing. But remember what Mordecai's words to Esther were. Perhaps you have been chosen for such a time as this. Those words were speaking about purpose, not progress. They were speaking about the purpose that God had for Esther, not her progression in life as an individual. I think so many of us mistake progress for purpose. That once we've progressed, once we've arrived where we think that we've achieved stuff, we take our foot off the gas and we're like, oh well, we are good. So Mordecai and Esther could have just sat in the palace and enjoyed the fruits of their labor. But because they had purpose in mind, because they knew what God wanted them to do, in verse 3, Esther says to the king, this is after she's received everything, then Esther addressed the king again. She fell at his feet, wept and begged him to revoke the evil of Haman the Agagite and his plot he had devised against the Jews. The king extended the gold scepter towards Esther, so she got up and stood before the king. In verse 5, she said, if it pleases the king and I have found favor with him, if the matter seems right to the king and I am pleasing in his eyes, let a royal edict be written. Let it revoke the documents the scheming Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, wrote to destroy the Jews who were all in the king's provinces. Then verse 6. How could I bear to see the disaster that would come on my people? Purpose. How could I bear to see the destruction of my relatives? And so Esther, realizing that she hadn't arrived, humbles herself again. She doesn't say to herself, now that I've arrived, now that I am queen, now that the king is pleased with me, let me just order him to do this and that. She remains bold, but not arrogant. She remains humble. Sometimes when people reach levels of achievement and levels of progress, they lose humility. Who should I beg? Why should I beg, they say. When in fact, privilege and achievement should show you that you don't know a lot. People who truly appreciate privilege understand that the more privilege you have, the more I realize that the world is a much bigger place than I ever thought. And there's more for me to learn. So in verse 7, King Ahasuerus said to her, look, I have given Haman's estate to Esther, and he was hanged on the gallows because he attacked the Jews. In other words, he could have been saying, but hey, I've given you everything that you want. What more do you want from me? But because he was pleased with her, he says, write in the king's name whatever pleases you concerning the Jews and seal it with the royal signet ring. A document written in the king's name and sealed with the royal signet ring cannot be revoked. Write whatever pleases you. On the 23rd day of the third month, that is the month of Sivan, the royal scribes were summoned. Everything was written exactly as Mordecai had commanded for the Jews, to the satraps, the governors, and the officials of the 127 provinces from India to Cush. The edict was written for each province in its own script, for each ethnic group in its own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in King Ahasuerus' name and sealed the edicts with the royal signet ring. He sent the document by mounted couriers who were fast as they went. Verse 11. The king's edict gave the Jews in each and every city the right to assemble and defend themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate every ethnic and provincial army hostile to them, including women and children, and to take their possessions as spoils of war. So here we see the reversal of things that Ahasuerus says, you guys write as you please. Do as you want to do. In writing this edict, Mordecai and Esther were giving their people a fighting chance, which is all that they wanted. Give us a lifeline that we can defend ourselves. When people attack us, we can fight back. And so by going back to the king, Esther and Mordecai pursue purpose such that a nation is changed. When Jews later on this month, in the month of March, celebrate Purim, they'll be remembering Esther and Mordecai. These guys chose purpose over comfort. They dared to go before a Persian king and ask him more than once for our lives. So we can, in 2025, celebrate what they did. Friends, we need to realize that when we pursue purpose, yes, the purpose that God has for our individual lives, it's not just about us. When we pursue the purposes that God has given us, it's also a door that we are opening for other people to discover what God has called them to do as well. They've got gifts and abilities which, if you didn't pursue your purpose, they would not know about. It's quiet in here, but I need your permission. Can I go a bit deeper? Thank you, ma'am. We can blame you. Some of us in this room carry generational trauma. Our parents and grandparents had to live and fight under an unjust system, right? But in our lifetime, praise to God, we've seen laws changed, opportunities have opened up, and now the spaces that excluded us, we are most welcome in. Now we sit in boardrooms where our grandmothers would only go in when they were about to clean the desk. So we've progressed. We are comfortable. Here's the question I have for you this morning. Have we as a people just settled for personal achievement? We've settled for personal achievement in such a way that we've forgotten the reason that God put us in the spaces that we find ourselves in. God has given you the education that you have, given you the opportunities that you have for a purpose. Could it be that as you sit in your corner office, you are satisfied with being at the top and have forgotten that you're called for purpose? We're so comfortable that we've forgotten to invest in the next generation. I remember early on when I was one of the first students at a certain university, I won't name it, and there weren't many people who looked like me, and all the classes were in a different language that I'd never studied before. We took time to help one another to understand what the textbooks were saying and help the next generation. People used to do that in corporate to help the young youth acclimatize to this is how corporate works. But now that we've become CEOs and senior managers, we've forgotten the purpose. We've forgotten the reason why we're there. We no longer care that other kids actually can't afford tertiary education. Why are they protesting? You see, in our country, we have a tendency, we have a sickness. We like to blame business leaders and politicians for being comfortable, right? They enjoy blue lights, but the truth is that politicians and business people come from among us. So they behave like we behave. And maybe what we should be doing instead of blaming is to look at the man in the mirror. There's a song that one musician writes, and he says in it, I'm starting with the man in the mirror, I'm asking him to change his ways, and no message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. So coming back to our text, I would say, child of God, God has called you, just like He called Esther, to live your life on purpose. You've been chosen for such a time as this. Not for progress, but for purpose. And so my challenge to you this morning is find your purpose. And if you know it, then live it. So the first lesson we pick up in this last two chapters is living our lives on purpose. But secondly, we learn about partnership. In other words, the battle is not for lone rangers. And so the Jews knew that the fight was coming their way. And so when Mordecai and Esther send letters to the Jews, what they're saying to them is that, guys, you can fight back. At the top of chapter number 9, we read the following. The king's command and law went into effect on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. On the day when the Jews' enemies had hoped to overpower them, just the opposite happened. The Jews overpowered those who hated them. Verse 2, in each of King Ahasuerus' province, the Jews assembled in their cities to attack those who intended to harm them. Not a single person could withstand them. Fear of them fell on every nationality. So as we read the chapter, we realize that there's a reversal of fortunes. The villains who are attacking are defeated. They're defeated in spectacular fashion. But how does this happen? Well, throughout the chapter, you'll pick up one thing. The Jews, amongst themselves and alongside other people, as verse 2 said, they assembled. In verse 3, they were aided by others. In verse 15, they assembled. In verse 16, they all came together. In other words, these people won because there were partnerships throughout the provinces. People realize that in order for us to defeat our enemies, I need to work alongside somebody else. Ecclesiastes 4:9 says, 2 are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up, but pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm, but how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And so the Jews knew that they were a small community. So they intentionally banded together and partnered with other people so they could defeat their enemies. Here's the truth. Collaboration and unity allows anyone to flourish. Anyone can flourish when you have people around you who are willing to help you. Could it be that in certain areas of your life, you are not succeeding, you're not excelling because you don't have partners? Even in business, where somebody could say, oh, I know just the person for this job, and they give you a call, but because you are not partnered up with anyone, you never get those opportunities. Oh, I'm trying to get this done, but because you are always on your ace, nothing comes your way. But because it's not a business, I want to go a bit further. We all know that this city, this beloved city of ours, is a jungle. We say it all the time. And what do you find in jungles? Dangerous animals. Even for vegans, the vegetation in the jungle is dangerous. You're not exempt. The city is a jungle, therefore the city is dangerous. And so when we go out into the jungle, we know one thing: let me not go into the jungle alone. I must have partners so that if I'm ever in trouble, we can help one another. That is what our city is like. But spiritually as well, our city is also a jungle. And if you don't develop spiritual partners, there are things out there that will chow you and spit you out. And one of the ways that you and I can ensure that we are covered is by being committed to our local church, where you know that you have people who can watch your six, people who are praying for you, people who are upholding you, people who love you. And every time I say this, Christians tell me, but I love Jesus. It's the Christians I have a problem with. Could it be that the reason that your spiritual life is flat, that you're seeing no victory in your life, that you're depressed and oppressed and under the work of Satan is because you have no spiritual partners? I didn't say that's so. I said, could it be that you find yourself in a spiritual jungle and no one is partnered up with you? No one is helping you to find the enemy and gain victory. The writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews 10:24, And let us consider one another in order to provoke love and good works, not neglecting to gather together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day approaching. And I know a lot of pastors use this verse about church attendance, but it's not just about church attendance. Because it talks about what we said even earlier, is that this is about people who are in the trenches with you. I don't just sit next to them at church, but I do life with these people, and I know that whatever happens in my life, they will stand with me because they are my partners. When you are in the midst of the worst day of your life, do you have somebody you can call and say, I don't need you to make me feel better. I don't need you to say anything. All I need you to do is pray. Friends, battles are won by teams. Battles are won by teams, not by individuals, by teams. I really wish we could get this deep down within us. That God has put people around us to partner with us so that we can win the battle. Because the antithesis to team is pride. Pride says, I can do this by myself. I don't need you. Can you imagine the Jews in Esther's time saying, no, we don't need anyone else but us to fight against the enemies? They would have been wiped out. Time and time again it says in Scripture, you are small, you are small, you are small. So God, through Mordecai, ensures that they know to band together and fight. Just imagine what a united, partnered up church could do in a city like ours. Churches that are partnered together, working the gospel. Can you imagine what could happen? Because that says that if you have partners, when we are thinking of Vachila groups, yes, those small groups, somebody who arrives in the city lonely without family finds family and friends right there. Many of you have left home, friends, hundreds of kilometers away. And now you have a child. Practical issue. We don't know who's going to babysit our kids. If you have partners, that's easy. Even friends who don't know how to look after kids will do it. Because you have what? Partners. People, as I said earlier, who will come on your behalf on fasting and prayer days so that you would sense and feel the presence of God in your life. When you're going through horrendous seasons, when you're going through horrible bosses, but you know those people love me, so therefore they've covered me in prayer. And there's so much more that I could say on this. But the bottom line is, when we are not all about ourselves, we grow and we help each other to grow. Can you imagine if we were partnered up as a country without little people trying to make cracks in our nation, where our nation would be? Partnership. The third lesson that we pick up is promotion. It's a word that we all want because we all want to be promoted. But promotion comes with responsibility. When we read the passage, we could easily assume that Esther and Mordecai were very pleased with themselves. She was just a beautiful girl who is now the queen of Persia, and now he is second in command to Ahasuerus. But promotion comes with responsibility, and throughout the text, this is what we see. Both Esther and Mordecai were faithful. Earlier on, Mordecai is faithful in reporting the assassination attempt against the king. Esther is faithful to her people by being bold more than once and coming to the king and say, hey, there is a problem. She speaks truth to power. So when she gets Haman's estate, that is an elevation based on her hard work. When Mordecai is elevated to second in command in the nation, it's because of his hard work. And in chapter 10 and 3, we are told that he becomes the most powerful man in the nation. So promotion comes their way, but promotion didn't just come their way. There were obstacles that they had to overcome. Promotion is a reward. Most of us, many of us, desire promotion, but we're not willing to do the work that it takes for us to be promoted. Don't worry, I'm preaching to myself as well. Please promote me. But the truth is, I'm not a diligent person. So I'll pray and fast about promotion, but I don't actually want to do the work. What did we say last Sunday? Faith requires action. And some of you who are super spiritual, and I probably will say this as well, but Pastor, doesn't promotion come from God? Yes, it's true. And David says so in Psalm 75. Exaltation does not come from the east, the west, or the desert, for God is a judge. He brings down one and exalts another. And yes, if we were to go back to the story, we could realize that Esther and Mordecai didn't grow up in the palace. So for them to get to where they got to, it had to be the favor and the grace of God. So yes, God is the one who gives us promotion. But here's the thing. Two things can be true at once. God gives promotion, but there's also work that you and I have to do. Too many of us are waiting at the sidelines of life, waiting for promotion with little or no effort from our side. We're just waiting, praying, thinking that the more I pray, God will give me promotion. And God says, I've given you favor. But when my favor shows up, will you be ready? When my favor shows up, would you have prepared? Esther and Mordecai aren't promoted, and when they get there, they don't know what to do. See, sometimes the reason people get lulled into comfort when they're promoted is because they have no clue why they were promoted. People with purpose know that when the opportunity of promotion comes, what do I do with it? One of the reasons, unfortunately, we don't do it in our country, in some countries, before an election, they say, can you guys have a debate? Tell us your vision for the country. So people can vote with what? With knowledge. We don't do that. But in countries that they do that, people are able to say, so if we promote this one, he is ready. If we promote this one, she'll be better than the first guy. But when you never have that, you never know. So you vote and you get no results, then you are surprised. They never knew. That's for free. Listen, one. Esther had to act. She was bold. So the question is, are you bold enough to put yourself on the line for promotion? Stop praying. Oh, let me put it this way. Stop just praying. Prepare yourself. Pray because that's the right thing to do. Prepare yourself because that's even what God calls you to do. Take responsibility. Because here's the thing, child of God. God is already waiting. God is already waiting. So in which area of your life do you need to move from passivity to bold action so you can see promotion? Because when promotion comes, it comes with responsibility. So if you know that you're an individual who's afraid of responsibility, don't ask for promotion. Just stay where you are. Because in chapter 10, we're told that when Mordecai was promoted, it says he was respected and he had the welfare of his people. So with courage and wisdom, he was able to build a future because he understood the responsibility that it took. Now, even as we talk about promotion, I want to give us a word of caution about it. Most of us, or some of us rather, let me say some of us, desire promotion because we want recognition or affirmation for who we are. We believe that when we're promoted, people will value us. They'll love us more. Or in your work situation, if I get promoted, I'll earn more money. So it's more like you want promotion for self-worth and not for the blessing that God wants you to experience when you're in that place of promotion, to be a blessing to other people. So Peter says to us, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your cares on him because he cares about you. This means that God loves you so much, you don't need a promotion to feel validated. God cares about your financial situation. He cares. And so you're like, oh God, but if I get promoted, I'll get more money and I'll be more valuable. God says, no, you are as valuable exactly where you are. Understand and receive my love. So that promotion never becomes a God to you. So that promotion never becomes something of value for you, but that it becomes an extension of my blessing on you. The fourth lesson is that of presence. In other words, God is in the details. One thing that we've said throughout the book of Esther is that God is never mentioned. There are no prophets, there are no miracles. Yet things worked out. You see, at the beginning of this book, when we started, we were invited to a whirlwind tour. We saw excessive wealth, sushi and champagne parties. There were beautiful girls. This was the order of the kingdom. It was a world where the powerful took advantage of the poor, a place where pride and hatred were celebrated as ambition. And if I was to describe this to somebody in 2025, they would say, hey, that sounds like our city, right? But here's the thing. In the midst of all that debauchery, that decadence and depravity, God was at work. Because ultimately, the book of Esther is about how God is present in all situations of life. Even though evil was happening, God still had people in position to fulfill his desires. And so the writer of Esther invites us to look into how God is present. He's present in the mundane, but more than that, he's present even in the most horrible of places. Because no place scares him. No place keeps God away. That's why David says, God, where can I hide from your presence? If I go down to hell, you are there, God. If I go down to heaven, you are there, God. You happen to be everywhere. And God shows us through this book that even when this girl is in a place where she didn't want to be, even when she had to do things that I would not allow in my law, I am present. I am so present, I keep my promises. What happens in the book of Esther is not God keeping a promise to Esther. It's a promise that he made to Abraham thousands of years before, that I will always look after your children. And so God rescues them because he is a faithful, ever-present God. So when they were under attack here, God doesn't come through, he doesn't come through by opening the Red Sea. He doesn't come through by angels, no. He comes through by even using the very wicked laws of that nation. Because God says, I am present. How Esther and Mordecai overcome and prevail is because their faith or their trust was not in themselves. And child of God, you need to know that that very same truth that applied to them then is true for us today. We can look around our nation and say, we are under attack as a country. Corruption has crippled this nation, yet God says, I am at work. Oh, but God, there's crime, there's debauchery. God says, I know. I am in the details. I am working in you. I am working through you to bring change in the spaces and places where you find yourself in. The question this morning is that, do you see God at work? Are you even looking for him where you are? Even if we go to the time of Jesus, God works in an unconventional manner. How could a Savior save us by dying? Save us by dying the most brutal death of that time, but that's exactly how God saves us. And God says through Jesus, a place of cursing becomes a place of blessing. I want to show you that at the very worst, with Christ in the grave, I am present. So that you can experience me forever and a day. Now, I know that for many of us, it feels like God is not present in our lives because we don't see miracles. Perhaps you're struggling with a sickness and it's been a long time. That relationship that you're in is not coming right. Boldness at work has only gotten you into trouble. Or you're struggling with the same sin that your uncle and your father struggled with, and you're like, God, are you present? Let me say this to you even as I speak to myself. Trust in God's unseen work. Act courageously in faith and celebrate His deliverance. Because as we read the scriptures, what we see is this, that your struggle is not the end of your story. God sees you. And He's working in you. He is working around you. And even that which you're struggling with today, God says it just might be a setup for tomorrow. In this story, we see that what the enemy meant for evil, God uses for good. And throughout the Bible, we are reminded of that. That God turns things around for good because He was always there. He's always present. And Christ on the cross shows us that. So my challenge to you is that look for God. Ask Him, God, would you show me your presence in small and big ways in my life? How are you at work? I don't know how much time they gave me, but based on the clock, I have enough time to squeeze in the bonus lesson. Don't blame me, blame the people at the back. The fifth thing we learn from these last 3 chapters is praise. In other words, make a joyful noise to the Lord. In chapter number 9, verse 18, it says, "But the Jews in Susa had assembled on the 13th and 14th days of the month. They rested on the 15th day of the month, and it became a day of feasting and rejoicing." Jump to verse 20. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews in all of King Ahasuerus' province, both near and far. He ordered them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar every year, because during these days the Jews gained relief from their enemies. That was the month when their sorrow turned into rejoicing and their mourning into a holiday. There were to be days of feasting, rejoicing, and of sending gifts to one another and to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the practice they had begun, as Mordecai had written them to do. So after all the fighting, the Jews celebrated. They celebrated the victory that God had given them. What the villain had planned against them, God had turned for their good. As you read the text, watch this. The letter that Mordecai wrote said, you can defeat your enemies and take their plunder, right? But as they attacked and defeated their enemies, it says they took no plunder. In other words, these guys were so confident and determined in God that they said, we never wanted it to be ever said that our victory was because we took other people's things. God is the one who has strengthened us. God is the one who has done a miraculous thing for us. And if you were to go back to the Old Testament, that's what King Saul was supposed to have done. But here's what's meaningful about this lesson. It tells you and me that every now and then we need to stop, literally stop, and thank God for what He has done and for what He is doing in our lives. He has rescued us from eternal damnation, and He keeps on rescuing us each and every day. If I talk about these streets being streets of the jungle, trust me, God is with you every day. His fingerprints, no, even His hand is all over your life in every situation. And what you should do, what I should do, is stop, to pause and say, God, thank you. The question is, do you ever pause to thank God, or are you always complaining? Do you ever say, God, I might not be where I want to be. I might not have everything that I want to have. But in this moment, can I just say, Waymaker, you made a way. My back was against the wall, but you made a way. This is what we are called to. Because when we worship God, God begins to change our perspective on some of the things that we're facing. They might not be completely removed, but God gives us a God perspective, and God might even say to you, hey, what you're going through is giving you patience, is giving you endurance. Or maybe in the midst of what you're going through, you need to learn to trust. Worship gives us a God lens. It gives us a God perspective on whatever is happening in our lives. It allows us to not only sing about God's power, God's glory, God's goodness, but to begin to experience it in our lives. Thousands of years later, as I said earlier, many Jews will gather about 2 weeks from now to celebrate this victory. You see, when we stop to pause and to praise God, we're not just speaking to our situations, we're speaking to generations that are coming. We're telling our children, that's not my job, it's not my position that makes things work, it's God. And I want you to see that. And how you see that is by you seeing me as a parent worship. That it is God who took us through everything. For us as a country, guys, we are where we are. 31 years later, yes, because of sanctions. Yes, because of international pressure. Yes, because of negotiations. But ultimately, God was at work. God's fingerprints can be seen in this nation to be where we are. And one way that we don't lose a sight of that is by stopping as a nation to every now and then say, God, thank you that we are here. Yes, there's corruption. Yes, there's racism. Yes, there's everything. But God, we just want to say thank you. Give us a perspective for our nation, because maybe, just maybe, as God gives you a perspective about our country, some of you who are seated here might be called on a purpose and a mission to change this nation. Maybe you are born for such a time as this, to bring about change. But if you don't have a God perspective, all we will do is complain. All we will do is moan. Instead of realizing that I might not be where I want to be, God, like Esther. But God, give me boldness so I can live for you. So as we end our series, I want to say to you, go live lives that are bold and beautiful. Paint this nation red for Jesus. Because you've been called for such a time as this.